Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and there's a growing phenomenon in the Democratic Party which is troubling to many traditional liberal Jews. I'm sure you know that more than 70% of American Jews are at home in the Democratic Party. It's a political axiom in America that the vast majority of American Jews vote Democratic and support the liberal, idealistic goals that have traditionally been associated with the Democratic Party and its principles and platform. However, since the midterm elections of November 2018 and the swearing in of new members of Congress this January, there are things being said and done, said about Jews and about Israel, that are appropriately upsetting, if not frightening. For example, during the primaries, the new darling of the Democratic Party, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, accused Israel of massacring Palestinians along the Gaza border fence. She also has upset many Jews by her recent 45-minute conversation with British opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn, an avowed anti-Semite. Two other freshman Democratic Congresswomen, Rashida Tlaib of Michigan and Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, both openly support the BDS movement that seeks nothing less than the eradication of the State of Israel. And Tlaib went so far as to question American loyalty among Jewish and non-Jewish supporters of Israel. Responding to an anti-BDS bill in the Senate, authored by Marco Rubio, Tlaib accused those supporting the bill of forgetting which country they represent, as if they cared more about the Jews in Israel than about their own United States. Similarly, Representative Omar recently tweeted that AIPAC literally controls American foreign policy with their financial support of members of Congress. For the record, AIPAC gives no money to any member of Congress. Omar has since apologized for her remark, suggesting she needs to be educated about the subtleties of anti-Semitism. But both Tlaib and Omar oppose the anti-BDS bill, which would protect from lawsuit any state that passed anti-BDS legislation that would ban government funding of any company that supported BDS, similar to laws passed in the 1970s during the infamous Arab boycott of Israel. But it's not Tlaib and Omar alone which is troubling about the contemporary Democratic Party. Almost every one of the declared Democratic candidates for President of the United States also came out in opposition to the anti-BDS bill. This includes Cory Booker of New Jersey, Kamala Harris of California, Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, and Bernie Sanders of Vermont. And Bernie said the Anti-Boycott Act, quote, punishes Americans who exercise their constitutional right to engage in political activity, unquote. In other words, Bernie Sanders' opinion is that support of the BDS movement, which again has the stated goal of eliminating the State of Israel, support for BDS is a legitimate form of American political activity. By the way, the anti-BDS bill, which also codifies $38 billion in defense assistance to Israel passed the Senate by a vote of 77 to 23, with only one Republican voting against it, Rand Paul of Kentucky. What's so troubling to many mainstream liberal Jewish Democrats is that there seems to be a growing anti-Israel bias within the Democratic Party. And when members of Congress begin supporting BDS, which may well be the single most immoral movement on the planet Earth today, when members of Congress begin supporting BDS and question Jewish loyalty to America, then, as Bret Stephens writes in a recent New York Times editorial, there's a danger of anti-Semitism becoming mainstream and of anti-Israel legislation becoming a political reality. So what's it all mean? Well, to help us sort it out, I'm delighted to be surrounded once again by a most thoughtful and insightful panel. Let me introduce them to you once again. Thane Rosenbaum is a distinguished fellow at NYU Law School, is the founding director of the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society, and is a prolific essayist and award-winning novelist whose most recent work is How Sweet It Is, and whose upcoming book is entitled Crossing the Line, The High Cost of Weaponized Speech. Eric Yaffi, a Reform rabbi, led Reform Jewry for 16 years as the president of the Union of Reform Judaism, the organization of Reform synagogues in North America. And since his stepping down from that position in 2012, Eric has become a leading Jewish columnist, writing for Haaretz and other American and Israeli publications. And you can also read Eric's column at ericyaffi.com. Betty Ehrenberg is a longtime Jewish professional who's worked with the political arm of the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations of America, the Office of the Israeli Consul General of New York, and the Jewish Community Relations Council, also of New York. Currently, Betty Ehrenberg serves as Executive Director of the U.S. and North American branch of the World Jewish Congress. And I'm joined by Jonathan Mark, one of American Jewry's leading journalists and columnists, and Jonathan is the associate editor of the Jewish Week. And thank you all so very much for joining me once again. All four of you, I love you all. All right, so we get into it. Eric, as someone who's been identified as, I think we would say center-left. Is that fair, or are you further left than
No, center-left is fair.
Okay, and you've certainly been associated with the Reform Movement, Democratic Party, blah, blah, blah. I want you to react first. When you see the Cortez and you see the Taib, et cetera, and you hear that, we're not talking about crazy conservative Jews now. We're talking about Jews who've grown up as Democratic supporters. When you hear that there's an uneasiness, what's your reaction? To what extent are you uneasy?
There's several issues here. There's the big picture, and then there's some of the specifics that you mentioned. On the big picture, I see it differently. I'm much more optimistic. We always need to be concerned when there are anti-Israel voices that are coming from the Congress. We have to be concerned when there are anti-Israel voices that are coming from anywhere. But
when's the last one? Prior to this new crop, what people have felt was you couldn't find somebody in the Democratic Party that was an elected member of Congress who was saying something that was pro-BDS.
Very rarely, and that's a good thing. Let me say my own view is the Democratic Party, as represented in Congress, is a strongly pro-Israel party. Its leadership is as pro-Israel as we have seen, in the last decade. Very strong pro-Israel voices. There are, in fact, some issues that have arisen that you mentioned. They've responded to those issues, generally speaking, very well. very emphatically. The notion that there's some grave danger of a rift between Israel and the United States Congress, I think, for all practical purposes, is not a real possibility in any sense. Now, you mentioned some, specific individuals. First of all, they're all different, and I do think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is she anti-Israel? And her statement was not made during the primaries. It was made earlier. She backed away from that statement. She acknowledged that, in fact, she had little or no information about Israel. In essence, said, I don't really know very much about Israel, and since then has been quiet. I suspect one of the factors at work for her is she represents a district in Queens. And she...
How is that relevant?
That's relevant because you can't get reelected to Congress if you're going to be an anti-Israel spokesman and come from Queens, New York.
Did it bother you she seemed to cozy up to Corbyn?
Yes, absolutely. I think anybody who approaches Corbyn has got to acknowledge in one way or another that Corbyn's an anti-Semite. I mean, we shouldn't be equivocal on that point. Corbyn is an anti-Semite. So the fact that an anti-Semite could become Prime Minister of Great Britain is deeply and profoundly disturbing, and I think that she should have found a way to mention that. The irony is that we've been focusing on Ilhan Omar because she said some anti-Semitic things, apologized twice for them,
for two separate things.
Two separate things.
Let's be clear.
Two separate things, both anti-Semitic things, in my view.
So that means that even after she apologized the first time, she didn't quite get the memo.
She did it again and was reprimanded by, appropriately by her party.
And we'll see it again.
My own sense is our focus should be on, I believe it's pronounced Tlaib. She is by far the most dangerous of the three.
What makes her the most dangerous?
Well, first of all, Omar is not somebody who has a particular history of dealing with issues of Israel, and her agenda is not an Israel-focused agenda. Tlaib is a different matter altogether. She's Palestinian, of Palestinian origin. Her grandmother lives in the West Bank. She's been an outspoken anti-Israel individual for many years, and will, I suspect, attempt to take some leadership on this. I suspect we'll be hearing from her a lot more than from the other names that you mentioned. Let me say once again that I believe the party's handled it very well, and the party is very pro-Israel. Final point on BDS. Nobody is as much opposed to BDS as I am. I'm absolutely unequivocally opposed to BDS. I do not think it is right or fair to dismiss the free speech objections to the particular BDS bill that was presented.
I can't wait to talk about that. But first I want to know whether any of you seriously disagree with Eric's evaluation.
Well, I usually disagree with everything Eric says, although we're very close friends. At least there's no difference today. Yes, I disagree.
How?
Well, I mean, this is just unprecedented. And I wouldn't casually remark about this as saying, well, there are different times in history. No, there actually hasn't been a time in American history where a significant section and a very vocal section of the Democratic Party has taken such avowedly anti-Israel positions. You pointed out a year ago, maybe, on one of our programs, you said, let us not forget that 2 presidential elections ago, during the Democratic Nomination Committee, there was an attempt to actually insert a pro-Palestinian plank. That was the first time that anything like that had happened. You correctly pointed out it was rejected, but I think that was a foreshadowing of something. Because I have no doubt, I said it, I'm saying it on JBS, there will be a pro-Palestinian plank in this next Democratic election.
You think so?
Absolutely. And the reason for it is for the reasons, all the things that Eric forgot to talk about, that he mentioned, or you mentioned in your opening, 5 presidential candidates.
Yes.
5, he's talking about the small fish I want to talk about the big fish. 5 presidential candidates who are well known to the American public, who because of Trump and their opposition to Trump receive an enormous amount of attention. Because of their opposition to Kavanaugh, received an enormous amount of attention. These people actually said, no, we think it's okay to discriminate against Israel. We don't think it's okay to discriminate against gay people. But we definitely think it's, and its connection into say, well, we disavow ourselves of anti-Semitism. You can't. If you believe in BDS, you have anti-Semitic leanings. That's just what it is. And so to pretend otherwise is to just be intellectually dishonest. If you are pro-BDS, there's something in you that has problems with Jews. Because what you're really saying is, I don't really like the idea of a Jewish state. I think it's the one country in the world that's illegitimate. It's the one, just so happens to be Jewish, and that's why we start there. But it's one country alone that is illegitimate. And secondly, I kind of like the idea that they wouldn't be a state. And I guess the reason for that is I kind of like the way it was before. I like the way Jews had it before, where they were expelled and that they were subjected to genocide. That's the way I liked it. And that's what they're saying.
Every senator who voted against the bill, you're saying is pro-BDS. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that what you said at the end is just utter nonsense. And I'm saying it as a law professor. Utter nonsense. To dismiss the First Amendment argument. And I guess what, Eric? I have a First Amendment book coming out, and I'm a law professor. So it's absolutely nonsense, all right, to say.
Just make sure
because his point is to say, let us not pretend that the First Amendment issues
isn't real.
Say, no, the First Amendment issue, a person is free to object to the policies of Israel. That's your First Amendment right. And I would support anyone who says, look, I don't agree with the government. I wish they did this. I don't like this. I don't like the way they do it this way. But to openly discriminate, boycott, and sanction is an act of discrimination. And that is not a First Amendment issue. And that is nothing that we would tolerate on any other progressive agenda except when it comes to Jews and except when it comes to Israel. And that's what Eric said at the end.
Well, I think also we have to remember that we're always talking about criticizing Israel. What's the matter? I can't criticize Israel. No one ever says that. What's the matter? I can't criticize Brazil. I can't criticize France or Zimbabwe or anybody. It's always focusing on Israel in a way to isolate, to humiliate, to keep on the bad list, to keep on the docket. And that's one of the things that I think is being showcased in the remarks of the big fish and the little fish. What bothers me about the little fish and what bothers me about the big fish are really two different things. First of all, about the little fish, there have always been people who have not liked Israel and the big fish. There have always been people who have not liked Israel. And we've had to really suffer with them sitting 25 years or more in Congress. I think of Findley, I think of McCloskey. We've been through really difficult people in Congress. Nevertheless, the newbies or the Tlaib or AOC and Omar are media darlings because the McCloskeys and the Findleys were basically on the fringes and nobody saw them in the paper every other day. And this makes, how to handle this is really a big question because I do believe, as Eric said, I do agree, this party is still basically very pro-Israel. The Congress is staunchly pro-Israel, and we're talking about I would say less than 10 people that are really problematic at this moment. The problem with the big fish is that they are running for office, and what are they picking up on? They're picking on some kind of trend that they're seeing on YouTube here and there, or on Twitter, which magnifies everything. These social media vehicles magnify these things, speed them up to the point where you're always seeing them all the time. So you think something that you must be seeing all the time must be a fact, it must be a trend, it must be the way people think. It's like advertising for aspirin or peanut butter or whatever it else that is brought into the public eye by advertising. With the candidates, the declared presidential candidates, I'm seeing flip-flopping, and that's what's bothering me. Are they trying to cater to some kind of trend that, unfortunately, by doing so, they are inflating and giving credence to when it doesn't have the, it's not trending the same way. It's not taking hold in the party as we would think. Why would a Cory Booker, who was pro-Israel, all of a sudden decide he's not going to be so pro-Israel? You saw the article by Shmuley Boteach. Shmuley Boteach was his first proponent. I remember sitting years ago in my office in the Orthodox Union when Shmuley Boteach brought in Cory Booker. This new candidate who was running for mayor of Newark, New Jersey. What about Kristen Gillibrand? She did not start out this way when she was first running for senator. This is what is disturbing to me, that people are changing. And that is, that's what's disturbing. Do I foresee that as a big change in the Democratic Party? I don't know if I'd go so far as Thane to say that, yes, I bet on the next Democratic National Convention you're going to see a platform, a pro-Palestinian platform.
Well, my guess is...
But my feeling is that it depends a lot on the leadership. I would have preferred if, like Kevin McCarthy, who stripped Stephen King, or the Republicans who stripped Stephen King of his membership in the committees, I would have preferred if that would have happened in the Democratic Party with Miss Ilhan Omar. That did not happen.
You would have liked what to have happened?
To have been asked to step down.
From the
leadership. I was puzzled as to why Ms. Pelosi put her in that position in the first place. That I did not understand.
Well, she's on a committee with Eliot Engel.
She's on a committee with Eliot Engel. I would have not, had I been Ms. Pelosi, which I'm not, but had I been her, I never would have placed her in that committee to begin with. So Mr. Engel is now going to have to find an MO to work with, or an MV to work with.
If somebody had said that, referred to African Americans as being lazy, would that person be on a committee with Eliot Engel?
No, there would have been an uproar and an outrage.
Would that person have been asked to resign Congress?
Yes.
No,
not Congress, the committee.
What are you talking
The
about?
committee.
Stephen King, for 15 years, expressed racist views filled with bigotry. 15 years. Nothing was done, and he didn't apologize once. That's the reality. So let's not talk about what's happening here.
But he finally was asked
as if it's
to.
in that. He was after.
He was
after 15 years, and again, absent an apology. Now, look, what Omar said was terrible. It was anti-Semitic. It should have gotten the rebuke that it got. And in fact, if we have any more of this, she needs to be removed from the committees. I am suggesting to you that if you read what the Democratic leadership said, it was very tough, it was very strong, and it was appropriate. And they pointed out, because I had some conversations with some of the individuals involved, that we have somebody who's struggling here and who has apologized and acknowledged that she was wrong, not once but twice. Now, having said that, she's made these mistakes.
But she didn't change her mind about what she said about the PACs, what she said about AIPAC.
Okay.
She did not change her mind about that. She made a point to repeat that. And yes, I have been speaking to the same individuals involved. I mean, I've been speaking to Mr. Engel, who I have a close relationship with as well. And I give a lot of respect to him. He wants to work with her. He wants to educate her. He wants to get her used to how Congress works and how the committee works. And I do give him credit for that. But I do agree that if something happens again, then she should not be allowed to continue.
You don't doubt his pro-Israel.
Never.
No. Engel?
No, and I don't doubt his smarts, and I don't doubt his...
rooted in reality here.
No, but what people are worried about is that these, quote, rising stars, which are getting a great deal of publicity,
Yes.
that somehow the rank and file, the people that we normally associate with mainstream Democratic Party, they're just being drawn along. And that's why so many people were surprised that all the, except for one, the candidates for president are saying, yes, I'm anti-BDS.
With respect...
Hold on. Yeah. Jonathan,
Yes, let's
as you look at this, does any of this upset you?
It upsets me, doesn't surprise me. First of all, in terms of the next Democratic convention, the last in 2012, they were booing Israel.
Correct.
The mass
For
of
the
the
Jerusalem
of the
plank.
delegates. So that's the mass of the delegates, not 3 people here and there. That's part one. When a couple of years ago, the entire Democratic Congress walked out on Netanyahu when he was invited to speak to Congress, with the consent of most of the liberal Jewish community. They all were cheering that the Democrats boycotted, as much as boycotting SodaStream, they were boycotting the Prime Minister of Israel. That was to cheers from the American Jewish community. Now we continue to fight. We're bringing nuance to a knife fight. So they are looking to kill, literally, the Jewish state. And we're saying, well, it's not anti-Semitism, it's anti-Zionism. It's not really, she said it, but she apologized. The fact is, I'm sorry they apologized. I wish they didn't apologize. I'm sorry she apologized, because I would wish these statements follow her around like with dripping blood, because otherwise what I see, whenever I read about her now, they say what she said, and then they say, but she apologized, as if she recanted after serious introspection, instead of she was being forced to apologize. Mm-hmm. It's meaningless. It's like the old joke about walking in on your wife cheating. Do you believe what you see, what I'm telling you? The fact is, these people are looking for blood, and we're looking for little nuanced, cute ways to say that it's not happening.
Okay. Eric's point is, it isn't mainstream Democratic Party.
I think it is mainstream, and the proof of that is the college campuses are mainstream young people. The Congress that walked out on Netanyahu is mainstream. The delegates that booed Israel and Jerusalem are mainstream. I don't see how you get more mainstream than the Democratic Convention, the Congress, or the college campus.
I see what John sees, which is there are more than just pockets of things that are being said that are appalling and are anti-Semitic, and suggests a kind of seething, low-level contempt for the Jewish state and Jews, let's not make any distinction, that is now being more accepted and accessible. Certainly on the left wing, and I've been on this show talking about the right wing as well, so that on both sides, right, you're seeing prominent voices saying things that were unimaginable 10 years ago.
I want to hear your thoughts on Thane's comment that it really is not a First Amendment issue, and those who tried to veil their pro-BDS stand by saying, no, we're not anti-Israel, we're just pro-free speech, that there's something ingenuous about that. But speak to that from your perspective.
Look, Thane as a lawyer has just written a book on this, and I'm not an attorney, but first of all, the ACLU came out on this very emphatically. I disagree with the ACLU from time to time on certain issues. I don't want to say they're always right, but they're very good on First Amendment issues, and very compelling on this point. The editorial page of the New York Times came out with a very rather lengthy and careful editorial making the case that the ACLU made from a somewhat different perspective, that there are, in fact, First Amendment issues. I mean, Marco Rubio basically argued that First Amendment issues do not apply to corporations, and that his bill was focused on corporations and corporate actions in the financial realm. Part of the problem here is how do you deal, I mean, this particular bill, how do you deal with sole proprietors or independent contractors who are, in fact, individuals, although their legal status is somewhat equivocal. So under this, I mean, the famous and most often quoted case has to do with a Muslim in Texas who was a teacher who taught special needs kids. And she had to sign something that she would take no action related to a boycott of Israel. And the problem with those words is it reasonably might suggest that she was not free to address this issue in a public forum. And that was mentioned as an example of what could arise in other states as well. What I'm suggesting is this is a gray area.
Okay, let me.
I'm pretty much a First Amendment absolutist. I think it's good for America. It's good for minorities. It's good for the Jews for us to be careful about that. And I mean, look, I'll conclude with this. Cory Booker is a lover of Israel. Cory Booker, the notion that Cory Booker is a pro-PDS or an anti-Semite is about absurd as a statement as one could make here or anywhere else. Cory Booker said specifically, I'm voting against this on First Amendment grounds. He had an amendment that he proposed that he suggested be included in the law, and he said it would have changed his vote. I want to put out there the notion there's a legitimate debate here as to whether or not this is a First Amendment question, and it is absurd to say that the 7 presidential candidates who decided on that basis are somehow anti-Semites.
Okay, I want to just push you just a hair. You are a First Amendment absolutist.
Pretty much.
Okay. If you had been in the Senate, would you have voted against this BDS amendment?
Probably not.
I don't understand.
How
do those things stand together?
It's a fair question. I was on the fence in this. I thought this was a gray area. I read the arguments on both sides. It was very, very close. I initially was opposed to it. They did, in fact, make an amendment to the law, although it wasn't a particularly good amendment. It said, this is not meant to infringe First Amendment rights in any way, but then it didn't give any specifics as to how that might work and what it might mean. But on balance, I mean, my own opposition to BDS is so strong, and because it was so gray, and because I'm not an expert, my instinct ultimately said, well, if I were there, I would have voted for the law.
Okay.
But I respected those people who struggled with this and who specifically on First Amendment grounds opposed it. There were no other grounds to oppose this bill.
Yeah. You mean formally there was no other. I just find it very interesting to hear you talk because on the one hand, you are impassioned about your support of the First Amendment and how you understand, and yet you say that for all of your understanding, had you been in the Senate, you would not have believed any of those First Amendment
No, I didn't say I wouldn't have believed any of them. I said
arguments
it's a
were
gray area.
more important. They weren't more important to you. They wouldn't be more important to you.
It was a gray area.
It wouldn't be, but no,
But
it
ultimately,
wouldn't be
yes.
more important
Ultimately,
to you.
for Eric
Well,
Yaffi,
wouldn't you like that to be true for Cory Booker?
I think a United States Senator has a responsibility to deal with First Amendment
I
issues
put you in the
serious way.
Senate when I asked you the question.
If I'm in the Senate, that's one thing. I respected
How are you
those.
different than Cory Booker?
Cory Booker suggested an amendment that would have corrected the situation.
So why wouldn't you say to me, I'm sorry, I'm with Cory Booker on this?
I could have come down that way as well.
But you didn't.
I didn't. That's true. I didn't. That's true. This was a tough issue, a close issue.
But you indicated.
That's ultimately where I came down.
And I wanted all of them to come down the same way you did.
And what I'm saying is dismissing them all as pro-BDS or anti-Semites is wrong and dangerous.
Anybody want to comment on
I don't
this?
think we're dismissing them as pro-BDS and anti-Semites. I think what we're trying to say here is that leadership in the Senate that 5 years ago would not have tried to pander, I'll use the word pander, to a voice in the Democratic Party which is consistently more and more critical or more and more condemnatory, not critical, condemnatory of Israel. That is a very disturbing phenomenon today. That's what we're seeing. And that is, I think, what is bothering us.
Do you all understand? Do you understand, and do you agree with me or disagree with me? I'm talking to, again, mainstream, liberal, lovely Jews who've always been part of the Democratic Party. They also care passionately about Israel. But they've done it within the Democratic Party with all the questions that have been asked, with the booing, whatever. This is the first time I'm hearing them say to me, I don't know where I can go now. I don't feel at home in the Democratic Party given the direction I'm seeing from the new kids on the block who are getting enormous television and press attention to members who are associated with the Democratic Party in the general culture. And an example is the Women's March, which seemed all of a sudden to have an anti-Semitic overtone. And when, Tamika Mallory is saying sort of lovely things about Farrakhan, and Jewish leaders are leaving the Women's March because they don't feel comfortable anymore. This is a larger issue than simply 3 or 4 freshman congresswomen and the fact that there's been a pile-on. And, you know, Eric, when you say that Marco Rubio does Marco Rubio remember who he represents? When we hear that, and I'm not sure, given that he's not Jewish, I'm not sure it was a classic dual loyalty argument, although there are members of the Jewish community who have come down very heavy on that, as if it were a dual loyalty argument. But I'm talking about a general mood here. And the mood here is that people who have been at home in the Democratic Party, who are on the liberal side, who've been critical of Israel, and also love Israel, are less at home.
Can I also respond to something that Eric said? In order to explain why he took this position on the anti-BDS bill, he said, well, Thane may be a law professor, but you know, the ACLU came on this side as well. Let us remember, the ACLU also represented the neo-Nazis in the Skokie case. Although they were so proud, the ACLU, of representing the neo-Nazis on First Amendment grounds, today they have misgivings that they represented the right-wing protesters in Charlottesville. That they literally had mass protests within their own ranks saying, well, we can represent people who hate Jews, but we can't represent people who hate blacks. Really? Really? I thought you were a free speech absolutist, Eric. Which is it? Is it only what? Jew haters is fine, right? Which is why Tamika Mallory is interesting to us, right? She's going, well, you know, I'm all woke. I'm all racially minded. I'm all for progressive things. But I'm also into Farrakhan because he has really horrible things to say about Jews, and I would not repudiate him for that. Because that kind of hatred is okay. Hatred of African Americans is not okay, of LGBT rights is not okay. Is
that a free speech
of
issue?
Muslims. No, just saying we have this incredible double standard when it comes to everything. Jews are open, it's open game. If you, all of a sudden, Farrakhan can win a medal from
Give
them.
me
also,
a break.
Also, let me just say that the women who were the original founders of the Women's March withdrew from it. Why? Because when the founders first met, they were hearing incredibly anti-Semitic things about you people. You know how Jews are. And these Jewish women who were the the actual founders, not Tamika Mallory, who's an absolute nobody, a Farrakhan lover, the actual founders had to withdraw because they were so uncomfortable that they were sitting in a room with anti-Semites who unabashedly, shamelessly were expressing anti-Semitic stereotypes.
Anti-Semitism is not an issue of left and right. Opposing bigotry is not an issue of left and right.
No, that's not the issue. Is it normally wasn't we normally did not associate with Democrats at all. Nobody is saying that only Democrats are anti-Semitic. The problem is we don't want the Democratic Party.
No, we do not.
To seem to be moving away from Israel, and. I would be happy to hear any of you speak to this.
Just one more thing I want to say about Eric. Eric also cited an editorial from the New York Times. Wow. There was actually just the other day an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal by Eugene Kantorovich.
Oh, please.
Right, okay. But so it's just in case our viewers are listening to Eric.
Kantorovich, I want to suggest, is on the fringes, and he's always on the fringes.
I would suggest that you should read Kantorovich's op-ed.
The Scalia School is where he teaches, and that's what he represents.
By the way, he's a brilliant
He's a brilliant man. I'm not
brilliant.
suggesting he's not brilliant. What I'm saying he makes fringe arguments. He makes the same arguments.
No, he pointed
He makes the same arguments on the West Bank, by the way, when it comes to those issues.
He actually pointed out that your ACLU was
I read the article.
Hypocritical because when it came to this issue, they didn't see discrimination.
Let me suggest
but when it
to you
comes to other acts, it is
the
discrimination.
ACLU has a lot of credibility with the American people on these issues. You may not agree with them. I don't always agree with them. They have a lot of credibility on First Amendment issues.
Well, you don't
Less
agree
than
with
they
them.
used
You've already told us you don't agree with them on this issue.
I told you
don't agree.
it's a gray area, and I ultimately end up on the other side.
But wait, it may be gray, but you were able to come to a decision.
I was able.
Okay. You said something earlier, and I want to hear you speak it to it and everybody. There is a constant question now. Is anti-Israel anti-Semitic. Is it possible that there can be a mainstream movement that is pro-BDS, anti the existence of the State of Israel, which is at the same time not anti-Semitic?
No, and which is why it's meaningless to have the discussion anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism, because we're talking about the Jewish state, and we're talking about the majority of the Jewish people living in that state who are who have had thousands killed over the past several decades, and there's no separating the two. It's like saying I'm against the European Jew in 1940, but I'm not against Jews. You know, it's a meaningless distinction that is perfect for the anti-Semite to hold on to. Because are we supposed to leave the room with an anti-Semite saying, well, he's really okay with Jews, he just hates Israel? No one would accept that. That would be seen as absurd. A gay person wouldn't say, I'm just against bakers who won't give me a cake, but I'm really okay with gays. No, that's not no other ethnic group looks for such subtlety as a way to accept someone who hates them.
What do you think?
Definitely anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, because Zionism is an intrinsic part of the Jewish identity. Israel is our homeland. Israel is where we were born, and we are the aboriginal people of Israel. So if you hate Israel, you hate Jews. You hate the ability of Jews to lay claim to their national identity, which is Israel.
You're a liberal and an intellectual. What do you say?
Why is it the national aspirations for the Jewish people is not entitled to statehood? How could you even possibly use the word anti-Semitism and not be an anti-Semite? Because what you're really saying is that these people must be stateless. These people, surrounded by, what, 22 Arab countries, surrounded by, I can't even remember, the millions of Muslims. This group of people, this small group of people, they are illegitimate and do not deserve
Okay, and
statehood.
what if somebody said to you, look, I'm against the occupation, I'm against the brutalization of Palestinians, which is being done by Israelis all the time. I'm not against there being a Jewish state, but it can't be a state that brutalizes Palestinians.
But then it can't be anti-Zionism. It can't. Then why is it anti-Zionism? Why are you calling it that? If you're calling it anti-Zionism, I'm saying that the national aspirations of the Jewish people to live in their ancestral homeland is delegitimate.
What do you think on this issue?
I believe it is theoretically possible to separate anti-Zionism from anti-Semitism. I believe you could put together an intellectual construct if you worked at it. I think in practical terms it is impossible, and it essentially never happens. Mm-hmm. And the fundamental reason is and Thane and others were talking about this, you're applying a different standard to Jews than you apply to every other people on the face of the earth. And that inherently is unacceptable.
Who talks about the Danish people like this? Where, in what forum do we have legitimate conversations that are considered absolutely essential about to say the Dutch people have no right to a homeland? The Danish people have no right to a homeland.
Okay.
The Icelandic people, those little Icelandic people, are...
Nobody says it.
No one says it.
Okay.
And it just so happens that when someone says, why it's so curious, why do you start there? I guess you can argue, well, you got to start somewhere, all right? Except that you're starting with the people that are the recipients of the oldest prejudice on our planet. The world's first prejudice was against the Jews, and oh, guess what? We've picked the Jewish state as the one that's illegitimate.
So all of us here say
Yeah.
that it's really an artificial distinction, this anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism. The other thing that's often said is, wait a minute, my BDS argument is boycotts, divestment, and sanction as it applies to those settlers on the West Bank. I'm not against Israel. Do you think that it is possible to support BDS without wanting the dissolution of Israel?
No, not BDS. First of all, BDS does not. They sometimes give the impression, intentionally, in my view, that BDS means we're just boycotting the West Bank. That is not their position. You can go to their website, you can go to their written statements, and so on. They are boycotting Israel and do not want to see a Jewish state. You know, there are a small number of individuals, Peter Beinart is one of them, who who say, well, I don't support BDS, I oppose BDS, I personally boycott products that come from the territories. That's not a position that I'm supportive of. My own view, you're making distinctions that are going to get lost when you try and convey them, and you're going to end up, in effect, sounding like a BDS supporter. There are a small number of people in that category, but by and large, that's not what we're talking about here.
Okay, you understand my problem. You tried very hard to explain that the matter is gray when it comes. Let me finish. Let me finish.
Yeah.
The matter is gray on First Amendment issue as it applies to this bill. But the reality is, are you suggesting Cory Booker, Gillibrand, Harris, Sanders, none of them understand what you understand? Namely, BDS is not a benign movement. It's a movement that tried to destroy the state of Israel. And if you do anything that even appears to be supportive of BDS, you're doing something that is suggesting to the American people that you're questioning the legitimacy as Israel now stands at best, and legitimacy of Israel altogether. And every one of us understands what you've said. You said it eloquently. That's one of the reasons why I was so upset. It's one thing if and I'm betraying here a certain sense of my own perspective on the freshman Congresswomen who've now been elected to Congress in the Democratic Party. I think they are extreme. I think some of the things they've said having to do with Israel are just sort of lack any serious thought. And at the same time, they seem to be very comfortable with the idea that there shouldn't be in Israel. And I don't want...
That just is not true, Mark.
Wait a minute. We know they are pro-BDS.
Ocasio-Cortez is not pro-BDS. The other two are. Ocasio-Cortez is not.
So you're saying my only error is that I lumped Cortez in there. But I'm still saying to you, why aren't you upset that a Cory Booker, who you claim is very pro-Israel, why aren't you upset that he wouldn't see what you saw and that he wouldn't make the distinction and say, look, I understand it's a free speech issue, but if I have to come down, I come down as Eric does. Because ultimately, BDS is not an intellectual exercise about a specific piece of the Israeli population. It is a movement. Go on a website. BDS was founded by people who say, from the river to the sea. And incidentally, any time you say from the river to the sea, there's no Israel there. I don't understand why people suggest BDS, that the protest on the Gaza border is protesting if Israel would only do X, Y, and Z. The only thing Israel can do is turn off the lights, pack up, and take a plane out of Israel. Now, why doesn't a Cory Booker
because
and
Americans
a Gillibrand
do not fiddle with the Bill of Rights.
Oh,
because the Bill
only Eric Yaffi does.
Because the
only Eric Yaffi fiddles with the Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights is fundamental to our Constitution and our system of government.
But say, yes, I would fiddle with it.
No, what I said is I struggled with it a great deal. It was a tough issue.
In the end, you had no trouble.
No, I did have trouble. Of course I had trouble.
Yes, but
what I've been explaining to you is how much trouble I had.
But you came down on the...
That's true. That's where I came down. What I'm saying is, on a close call, in a tough issue, particularly having to do with the Bill of Rights, which are especially important in these times, if you're looking what's happening on the other side of the aisle, and what's going on in America right now, and what's happening to minorities right now, special sensitivity to these issues are, in fact, an important part of who we are as Americans.
Okay. Do any of the three of you empathize with what I'm saying, or do you think I'm overstating it?
No, you're not overstating it. I mean, and I don't see, and I agree with what Thane said before, and I think was one of the things that Bret Stephens in the piece that you had pointed out was trying to say that people are supportive of what they want to support. They hear what they want to hear. And they discriminate where they wish to discriminate, and that is with or without sophistication about the Bill of Rights. I wish people were more sophisticated these days about the Bill of Rights and American history in general. They aren't. What's happening is really a very frightening phenomenon. I am loath to give up on the Democratic Party. I mean, I do not want to say that it's really, this is the end. And I'm hearing people tell that to me.
And by the way, I'm not here to give up on the Democratic Party.
But
I am
Maybe
here.
hearing that a little bit.
No. I am here saying that I'm telling you what I hear. What I hear from mainstream Jews
Look, I'm
is that
concerned,
they're
too.
no longer comfortable, and something has to change dramatically. If the Democratic Party is going to be pro-Israel,
it's more than, also what I would like to point out is that the three people we're talking about, Tlaib and Omar and Ocasio-Cortez, they're not three people. They are representing tens of thousands of people in their districts, aside from getting their appointments to top committees. Queens is not the Queens that you remember or I remember. Ocasio-Cortez is representing Forest Hills and Regal Park. She's representing a district that's overwhelmingly Hispanic and not people of any all the new pharaohs who didn't remember Joseph, like in Crown Heights, where the blacks there didn't remember Selma. That's just the way it is. And I think a big issue we haven't touched on at all is migration and immigration is a favorite issue. It's the nurtured baby issue of the Democratic Party right now. And where are these people from? None of them are. We all hate. No one. This is like the dirtiest word in America to bring up, but Tlaib's district is all new people. Omar's district is all new people. They all come from a part of the world that's anti-Semitic, according to ADL polls and all kinds of international
John, just so we'll
polling.
be clear, since you didn't say the word, I'll say it. You mean Muslims?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Right.
Just
Yeah, I'm sorry.
watch, Eric Yoffie's going to have a heart attack.
Yeah.
Yes, we meant Muslims. You're allowed to
I don't-
actually,
I don't-
you're allowed to actually call
We don't want
them-
any new people in this country.
We're
Let's
allowed.
build that
No.
wall.
Wait a second.
No, I wouldn't. I'm
if
not
I
in favor
was-
of that. I'm
if
just
I
saying
was-
if we can. This is the Obama strategy. You can't actually use the word Muslim in a
Right.
sentence.
That's why I just call them Democrats. I don't call them anything. But what's interesting is that the black in 1965, if he said, I don't want pro-apartheid people from South Africa coming to America, that would be perfectly normal. And Jews would support them. But why can't I say, I don't want people who are essentially anti-Jewish apartheid people coming to America
Who overwhelmingly might,
Yeah.
because the polling is very clear
Right.
throughout the Muslim Arab world.
Right.
In some countries, in Egypt, 90% of the people believe in a strict adherence to Sharia law.
Right.
And if you believe in a strict adherence to Sharia law, you simply do not belong in a constitutional democracy. I'm sorry.
Right.
That has nothing to do with it. It's just saying you don't get the Statue of Liberty concept.
Right.
You don't get the concept of pluralism and liberalism.
So Muslims are out.
No, I'm just saying to not recognize that there might be a legitimate argument to say, well, to compare all immigrants to the same, Jews came to this country
Most
and
Muslims who
embraced.
come to this country are not Arabs, first of all. They're from other areas.
All right.
So
Yeah, but we're not talking about Trinidad Muslims. We're talking about people from a certain part of the world. And where the problem is that, let's say if tomorrow Tlaib and Omar and Ocasio-Cortez all resigned, they would all be replaced by the exact same kind of people because that's who their districts are. Their districts are not nuanced districts.
I suggest we be careful about our language and the impressions that we create, and the notion that we fear the other, and the notion that we have to keep away people who might somehow, be contrary to our values and concerns. That has led to a great deal of bigotry and hatred in the country right now. It's led to terrible divisions from which we are all suffering. Jews have to be very, very careful about how they look at these issues from a values point of view and from a practical point of view.
I want you to address the article by Michelle Alexander, the piece in the New York Times that was celebrating Martin Luther King Day. what Michelle Alexander wrote was that Martin Luther King courageously spoke out about the Vietnam War.
Oh, yes, yes.
We
Right,
must do
got
the
it.
same when it comes to the grave injustice of our time. And she's talking about Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. And she was arguing that if Martin Luther King were living today, he'd be in the forefront of the anti-Zionist movement. That was a piece that was in the New York Times without any piece by it at its side giving a Jewish perspective. Now talking about the New York Times.
So I wrote about it for CNN, and I'm actually really proud of it. So I hope JBS viewers will look it up. It's my last Thane Rosenbaum essay for CNN.com.
And you said?
I said the following things. The first thing I said was, she describes the Palestinian situation, and she places herself in the position of a Martin Luther King who spoke out with great courage against injustice. And here she is. I, too, link arms with Martin Luther King, and I'm going to stand up on behalf of the world's gravest injustice. And I pointed out not a word about occupations in northern Cyprus, Kashmir, Tibet, and Kurdistan. Not a word there. There's no moral challenges there. The humanitarian crisis in Yemen, the genocides in Syria. Not a word about that. Somehow the Palestinians and the Israelis, the big bad Israelis, that's where Martin Luther King would have been. That's where he would have focused on. The second thing I said is, no, he wouldn't. Because Martin Luther King and his team of civil rights leaders, along with Jews who supported him, believed in passive nonviolent resistance. And where in the world do we see Palestinians who, by the way, have seen the movie Gandhi? It's not like they don't know the concept. They could have tried this. They never were interested in it. They have been perpetually focused on violence, terrorism, and elimination of the Jewish people. It's in their charter. It's in what they do. They're not interested in statehood. They're interested in Jew hatred. And so I just thought it was an incredible leap to make an assumption that the man who was opposed to violence and believed in protest through peace and passive nonviolent resistance would choose the knife-stabbing, car ramming, Molotov cocktail throwing, rockets from Gaza, flaming tires, incendiary kites. Really? That's Martin Luther King? I don't remember that. It may be that Martin Luther King, over time, and let me just say the last part, and then I'll let everyone. It was, and I quoted King several times in so many fascinating ways. King was a Zionist. He was an avowed Zionist. He said it. He spoke of Zionism, about the rights of the Jewish people to their homeland. And you know what else he said? And I quoted him in this essay. He said, he literally said, cut it out. When you're saying anti-Zionism, you mean anti-Semitism, with an exclamation point. He said the very thing that we were talking about here today. So I said it's just sort of curious that you've hijacked the legacy of the civil rights movement and somehow falsely, fraudulently implanted it in the Middle East, and you turned Israelis into southern sheriffs instead of people who have their own interest in peace but have never been reciprocated by these Palestinian neighbors, and the violence of Palestinians that has no connection at all to anything that Martin Luther King preached.
And he said so after occupation was already underway.
That's right. He said so, exactly. The whatever you want to call the disputed lands, he still said it then. And oh, by the way, can I just say something else? Yes. Eldridge Cleaver, who was a Black Panther, right? I mean, this is what's so great about this, also signed a document in 1975. In 1975, remember when the United Nations tried to equate Zionism with racism?
Of course.
Right, that famous, infamous amendment.
They didn't try, they did it.
They did. They actually did, all right? 200, this is very important to remember, 200 African-American leaders and celebrities signed a petition saying that this is just false and wrong, that there is no connection, they're not the same.
Does Michelle Alexander have the right to her opinion?
Of course.
Does the New York Times have a right to print it?
Well, all I would say is there was no rebuttal.
Right.
This thing was so avowedly anti-Israel. It had no...
It was on the op-ed page.
Because it fit
yes,
to print,
but
is
it
the
was
question.
right. The question is, Yes, but you know, they make decisions. I've
Yes.
written for them 6 times on that page. So I know they make decisions on what to do, and they don't
Okay.
not suggest to the author to say, you know what, there needs to kind of be a paragraph there that speaks to a different kind of a
Okay.
truth. And for some reason, they didn't want to do that
Okay.
here.
Is the Times associated with any political party?
Yes, the Democratic Party.
See, that's another problem here. There's this feeling at the moment that within the culture that is pro-Democratic Party, that they would publish this and that there would be no rebuttal. Now, as we're taping, we just saw this past weekend that Bret Stephens comes out with his own piece. And he is a columnist for the Times. And he writes, "The Progressive Assault on Israel." And he writes, "What's unsettling is that the far left's hostility is now being mainstreamed by the not so far left." He says, its core intellectual assumptions are wrong and rotten. That's where we are now. There is a movement in America which suggests anti-Semitism isn't a political movement, it's just fact. But what bothered me the most, I don't know if you saw it, were the comments published on the Times, certainly online, that were in response to Bret Stephens. The number of comments from Americans which were so viciously anti-Israel were very upsetting to me. So this is one. Israel cannot inoculate its horrible policies by hiding behind demands that it is beyond reproach based on its belief that it is a Jewish state. It is a modern democratic state, and it must abide by the basic tenets of democracy. Its very founding was based on the separation of families from the walling in of its own communities during the horrors of the mid-20th century. My question is, of course, is Israel anti-democratic? Is Israel anti-democratic?
No.
Okay. Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Many of us stand opposed to Israeli apartheid and human rights abuses, which run counter to Judaic teachings and culture. Groups of us actively opposed include Jewish Voices for Peace and International Jews Against Zionism. The membership includes Holocaust survivors who understand where such nationalism and prejudice lead. Bret Stephens makes a very, very powerful case for how the term apartheid does not apply to Israel at all. And yet the people who respond act as if nothing he says matters, and that is Israel is an apartheid state. Is there any extent to which Israel is an apartheid state?
Israel is not an apartheid state. Period. But talkbacks, do not necessarily reflect anything. I mean, my general rule, somebody who writes for newspapers, is you don't read the talkbacks.
Okay.
And it tends to evoke extremist views. It's very hard to generalize from them. I spent a few minutes on the responses, and mostly I found them to be so ridiculous that that they weren't worthy of reading, let alone responding to. I mean, my own rule when I write something is I only respond to something that's civil and sensible, whether or not I agree with it. But
Okay, you're in the journalistic business. What's your sense of, first of all, both pieces in the New York Times and the response to Bret Stephens?
Well, I agree with Eric about these comment sections. What scares me more is the number of people I know in Jewish journalism who do think it's an apartheid state. And I've heard that with my own ears from people in Jewish journalism.
In Jewish journalism?
Yes. And that's much
Do
more
they
terrifying.
go public with this?
I don't think they do, but it's that's the way all these things start. They talk privately, and then it'll be in public in a couple of years.
The
It
claim that
speaks to
Israel is
me.
apartheid.
Is ludicrous. But what it points to, the fact that so many people have bought it, is the success of the Palestinians staying on message, the orchestrated, highly financed campaign that has been behind this for many years and years and years. This didn't come just from today or 3 years ago or 5 years ago. It's in the air all the time. We can, scream our heads off that this is not so. We take people to Israel. We show people Israel. Look at the Knesset. Look at the courts. And it's a blind acceptance of people who want to just accept some notion that has been put forth on campuses, wherever we see it. It's been highly financed. We don't look at that. We haven't been looking at that. For years, the pro-Palestinian community has been hiring Madison Avenue ad agencies to put this forward. They've generated it. Mr. Corbyn in London, it's not just him. Even if he gets defeated, he has been reaching out to all kinds of people in the party in different places. The problem that we're talking about in the Democratic Party here is not just a few individuals, but other individuals like them, as Eric said, or Jonathan said before, if the ones that we find are the bad apples will not win re-election, there'll be others to supplant them. So what I feel here is how the problem, the dilemma facing the Jewish community. How do we face this onslaught? It's really, I feel it's like an onslaught. And it comes to us from all these directions, and it's really very overwhelming.
Betty, you're with the World Jewish Congress.
I am.
And you haven't figured it out yet?
I'm watching it happen. There was a Lukov march. Lukov was a Nazi, pro-Nazi. During World War II, there is a march every year in his honor in Bulgaria, in Sofia, in the capital. Just the other day, we saw a neo-Nazi march in Hungary, people getting dressed up in Arrow Cross uniforms, Kalashnikovs on their shoulders, marching up and down by the Jewish community. We're seeing in many Eastern European countries this nostalgia for Nazi sympathizers who now they deem as heroes.
So what can be done?
I just feel that we have to keep repeating what Israel is not apartheid. The Jews are not. There is no Zionist conspiracy. Standing up for who we are and what we believe in. Not tolerating the double standard and the demonization. And understanding that this will keep coming up in every generation. It will keep coming up in every generation, like we say.
Same question.
Well, that was I interrupted you before because I had a very good response at that moment, and that was several years ago I was on your show, and I had an essay in the Washington Post about the Taylor Force Act, and that was about new legislation in Congress to not give money to the Palestinian Authority if that money is being used to incentivize the killing of Jews, because martyrs, or those who commit crimes against Jews, were being given lifetime pensions, stipends, life insurance, health care for their families, and tuition benefits, and that the American taxpayer should not be paying for that, right? It's pretty standard stuff. We don't incentivize the killing of Jews, and the Palestinians do that. They reward and incentivize the killing of Jews. By the way, that legislation has passed, and it is enforceable.
Taylor Force has been passed.
And it actually, so in case if you're watching JBS and you're saying, we're doing that, I'm saying, well, other countries may be doing that, but we're not doing that. Certainly not anymore. We're not actually giving money to people as a reward for killing Jews. And you said that day when you saw the essay, you said, Thane, there were nearly 900 comments in the Washington Post. Did you read them? And I said, what Eric said was, I never read. Just because you have a phone and can make a comment, I don't care. I'm not impressed enough with you because you have a phone and you have a comment to me. But you said the vast majority were negative. Okay, so this is not new. This is something we've seen before. In my CNN essay, I address this apartheid. So if you're a JBS viewer and you listen to some imbecile insulting Israel, condemning Israel, reprimanding Israel as an apartheid state, here's what you say. You say, Arabs in Israel can eat in any restaurant they can want to go. They can take public transportation anywhere they can go. They can have any job they want to take a job. They can stay in any hotel. They take any public transportation. Arabs in Israel have served on the Supreme Court. And a Miss Israel 3 years ago, who is Ethiopian, was crowned Miss Israel. Now, in what moral universe would we say that about South African apartheid? It is an insult to what happened to black Africans in South Africa to make this kind of absurd comparison.
I want to suggest to you, and then I want to hear what you have to say, that when you strip it all away, the argument that is driving the anti-Israel lobby is predicated on this notion. The Jews stole somebody else's land. Yes, they had a tie that goes back 2,000 years. But when the State of Israel came into being through the League of Nations in the early 1920s, the Jews were a fraction of the population. And ultimately, the Western world, for various reasons, none of which having to do intrinsically with the land, said, we're going to placate some guilt over French anti-Semitism or anti-Semitism in Western and Eastern Europe. This is before the Shoah. And the way we're going to do it is, there are indigenous peoples all over the Middle East. We'll create states for them. And then there's one people who's not there at all. They were there a long time ago. We're going to give them a state where Arabs are now living. They were Syrians. They weren't called Palestinians, but they were Arabs. And we're going to artificially give one piece of land to the Jews. And by the way, Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, didn't get it enough that he would actually consider any tract of land, including Uganda. And the reason he would consider Uganda was that he understood he was importing something into a land. And the real crime of the State of Israel, the modern State of Israel, is that it was created on the backs of another people who were indigenous, and that ultimately Jews flooded that land. And as no less a Jew than Ari Shavit writes in his book, My Promised Land, we had to have Israel, but in doing so, we took another people's land and we destroyed another people in doing it. All the other, rhetoric, none of it matters. The real argument against the State of Israel that is driving the anti-Israel notion is, in the end, the reason why there should be no Israel is that it had no business coming into existence, and it was created by a League of Nations inappropriately. And therefore, history should be redressed, and there should be no State of Israel. I'm suggesting to you that the Jewish community has to realize that's the ultimate argument, and everything else is secondary.
I'm not sure that's the ultimate argument. It seems to me, based on the conversations we've had here, as well as what I believe is, in many cases, the arguments against Israel have nothing to do with Israel. They're rooted in this fundamental anti-Semitism that never disappears from the human heart, that has existed throughout history, and it is hatred of the Jews that is given expression at this moment by being directed at the state of the Jews. And I think any set of political circumstances, no matter how you might define them, really don't have a whole lot to do with that. So that means that we have to be eternally vigilant, because there's not going to be a magical answer to resolve this anti-Semitism problem that we haven't been able to resolve for, you know, the last 2 millennia.
What do you have to say about my construct?
I agree with you. I think that we're in a fight for our lives. That's the result of this argument. And I think
Have we effectively answered that?
no, because we haven't
Is
even
the-
convinced the Jewish people, let alone the rest of the world.
Yes, Jews believe this.
I would even say the
Jew-
majority of Jews believe it.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is the tragedy.
Right.
Your response.
And that's the problem. This is the tragedy, and that's the problem, that Jews don't understand that the construct is wrong, basically, that there were always Jews in Israel. Jews never left Israel. There were always Jews in Jerusalem. Jews never left Jerusalem. And that there was never another state that was in its place. There was never any kind of, certainly not any flourishing entity that was in its place. It had been left barren and fallow for so many years under all the empires that laid claim to her, so that when it is now flourishing and thriving and by leaps and bounds compared to everyone in the region, successful, people want to tell us, no, you were born in original sin. That's the biggest lie. It's a lie. And it is rooted in anti-Semitism. That is what our problem is.
How do we answer?
Well, first of all, it's factually wrong. The fact that there were fewer, yes, Betty is right. There have always been Jews that have lived from biblical times in that part of the world. That is their ancestral homeland. And in fact, there was a state at that time. King Solomon, King David, there was a time that there was a Jewish state that existed in a biblical era. But what we're forgetting is the fact that there weren't more Jews in that area was because of a history of anti-Semitism that led to killings and expulsions. So it's not like, we have to actually acknowledge, like, it's not because they never were there. They were always there, and they're fewer in number. It's not just the importing of them. They were fewer in number because of the expulsions and the killings against Jews that forced them out, all right? And so that is, you know, the core theme, that they had always had a historical right to this land. And yes, they were brought back as well. The second thing is, in order to believe this argument that you just said, that the world believes, you have to also buy in totally into the occupation argument, right? That Israel is occupying another country. The reality is that part of the world, and that land in particular, has never not been occupied. It was occupied by the Greeks, and it was occupied by the Romans, and it was occupied by the Ottomans and the Assyrians.
Why is that relevant?
Because it doesn't, because the land itself, especially the area of the West Bank, is really disputed land to begin with. No one really had phenomenal title to it. It is not Arab land per se. There is a claim.
How is it more or less than Arab land than Jaffa? Whatever applies to the West Bank applies to Jaffa. And the League of Nations was a duly constituted international body
Right.
that carved up the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
And what it said was, from Jordan, across the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, that was going to be Palestine. It was going to be the homeland for the Jews.
Right. But Jews lived in Jaffa also.
Yes.
So the point is Arabs and Jews have always lived there.
By the way, I believe the West Bank is disputed property, disputed land, but not as far as the League of Nations was concerned.
Well, yes. Well, we happen to know, which is one of the other pieces of history that people don't realize, is that, you know, when it comes to the Palestinian rejectionism of any compromise or of any offers of statehood, people forget, because I remember my father explaining this to me when I was a little boy. The original Balfour idea was that Israel would include Israel and Jordan.
Yes.
Do you realize the size of this country? The size of what Israel would have looked like? And then it became carved up so that the Hashemite community received Transjordan.
Correct.
And then there was Israel, which received, I think, 30% of what it was originally promised. And then on top of that, there was some contemplation of yet another small piece for the Palestinians. So the Israelis that initially, right, Ben-Gurion, had this huge promise that he could have done exactly what the Palestinians do. I am going to sit in a refugee camp for generations because you're not giving me what I want. This olive tree, not that olive tree. It's got to be this olive tree. No. The Israelis said, you know what? We are taking 30% of what we were offered. Give us the home now. We want to start now. Watch what we do in 70 years. And think about the real tragedy of the Palestinians is that even in the last peace offer, right, of 2000, they would be 19 years old. They would have a country for 19 years. They would have been started. And instead of starting out statehood, they're still where they're stuck in. When the Israelis had the same thing given to them, 30% out of this 100% they were originally given, they said, we accept it because we want a homeland and we want to get Jewish statehood commenced.
Okay, to wrap it up, you know, most American Jews, they hate Trump. You know that.
I do know that.
Did you watch the State of the Union?
I did.
There was so much Jewish stuff in the State of the Union. You get a kick out of any of it?
Look, the president gave an unequivocal condemnation of anti-Semitism.
Yes.
We will not avert our eyes from a regime that chants death to America and threatens genocide against the Jewish people. We must never ignore the vile poison of anti-Semitism or those who spread its venomous creed. With one voice, we must confront this hatred anywhere and everywhere it occurs. Just months ago, 11 Jewish Americans were viciously murdered in an anti-Semitic attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh.
I disagree with the president about virtually everything. That was nonetheless a very important statement for him to make. He made it in an unequivocal way. And I think we need to say thank you. We appreciate it.
Your comment on it?
Look, I'm appreciative. I mean, it did seem that there were at least 3 to 5 moments that were Jewish moments in the State of the Union. I mean, I think for a man who was criticized openly, certainly by me, for his equivocation at Charlottesville, there are fine people on both sides, it did seem to me that the State of the Union was, to some extent, to address this, that I am not in any way unmindful to the historic anti-Semitism, and that, yes, I know who Nazis are. I may not condemn them in the way that you would want me to, but I'm going to exalt who you are and what you've experienced throughout your history in my State of the Union.
Your reaction to it?
I think Pittsburgh was really an illusion. It was the right killer, white nationalist. It was the right victims, non-Orthodox Jews, who were like older and not really that active. And it was the right guy they wanted to blame it on, pinned the tail on the donkey over there. And that's why everybody gathered around Pittsburgh. The truth is, Pittsburgh no one really cares about anti-Semitism if it's anywhere else. So the president said a great thing. I think he's done a terrific job. You know, the embassy, he's going to be looked back upon as one of the great Achashverosh kind of or Cyrus kind of leaders that we've had. You know, he has problems clearly. But in 1940, you didn't really care who took you in at night. You know, you went your life was on the line. You went where you got taken in.
Your thought on it?
I guess I was moved by the Holocaust survivor.
Me too.
And the happy birthday.
Me too.
And just seeing a lot of Holocaust obfuscation, Holocaust denial in the world. And that was an important moment for that.
Do you understand it was just a little troubling that Pelosi didn't think she should stand for that?
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. That it was a moving moment, an important moment, certainly to our community, and I think. Okay.
I began with you. I'm going to end with you. And you've again had the brunt of a lot of it, and you handle it very, very well. I want you have the last comment about why, for all the things that you've mentioned, for all the things that we've discussed, you still are confident that American Jews who care about Israel and who have affiliated with the Democratic Party still have a home there and don't have to worry that the party is in some way moving away from its pro-Israel stand.
Didn't say we don't have to worry. We do have to worry. And we have to work very hard to make sure that we confront any anti-Semitism that may exist or that may grow. I do believe that our home is in the Democratic Party for a very good reason. Bret Stephens, in that article that you mentioned, concluded the article in a very important way by saying one of our parties has given in to bigotry, which it camouflages through social concern. And if that happens with a second party, meaning with the Democratic Party, that will be terrible for the fate of this nation. In other words, we're not talking here about bad guys and good guys. Jews congregate under the Democratic umbrella for very good reasons. They find it to be generally consistent with their values. There are warning signals. We have to fight for them. We have to make sure that we confront anti-Semitism wherever it appears. But by and large, there's no reason why we shouldn't triumph in this effort to keep that party favorable towards our interests and our people.
Good for you. Thank you, as always. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us, Jonathan.
Thank you.
You're always fabulous.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay. There you have it. The thoughts of Betty Ehrenberg, Thane Rosenbaum, Eric Yaffi, Jonathan Mark. Again, addressing what is, Eric calls it a gray issue. These are complicated issues. They're complicated. Fair? They're complicated.
Fair.
They're complicated. But you've heard some intelligent discussion, and in the end, you have to come to your own conclusions. We just hope that some of the discussion you've heard on this edition of L'chaim will help you as you think through your own positions on some very important, sensitive, complex, and urgent questions and issues that are confronting Jewish life today. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed on this edition of L'chaim. Please email me, write me, post it on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.